What's up guys, Kino Corner here. I know that I haven't been putting out many videos this year, between putting on a rock show during South by Southwest, growing the channel for the company that I work for, writing a feature screenplay, and directing the filming of an event starring Nick Pizzolatto. I've been incredibly busy outside of my YouTube channel. But when I finally got the time to sit down and make new videos, the unthinkable happened. I got the coof. I was bedridden for days, and for weeks I couldn't talk without coughing up my lungs. I felt like whatever momentum I was about to get going disappeared before it even began. However, I don't like to just sulk and feel bad about myself because I'm sick. I'm not saying that I wasn't complaining the whole time. Oh, I was. We men don't get sick and not complain. But I digress. I figured that since I couldn't leave the house, which meant that I couldn't work on my videos, then I should at least make the most of my time and watch some films that were on my watch list, but which I had never seen. I wasn't watching these to make a video, I was just watching them because I was sick and had nothing better to do. So the movies are kind of all over the place. It's a mix of Hollywood thrillers, indie darlings, foreign films, and more. I decided that it would be more fun to make a video reviewing the movies rather than just mindlessly logging them on Letterboxd, which is what prompted me to make this video. Oh, I also watched the series Rome, but I might cover that in a separate video. Spoiler alert, I loved it, of course. So, without further ado, let's take a look at these films. The first film I watched was Brian De Palma's Obsession, which released in 1976, which was the same year as Carrie. I like the title, and I'm a fan of De Palma. Body Double and Blowout are two of my all-time favorite movies. I also noticed that it was co-written by Paul Schrader, so this movie seemed like it would be a must-watch to me. The movie follows a wealthy businessman in New Orleans whose wife and daughter get kidnapped. The police's attempt to rescue them from the kidnapping goes tragically wrong, and the protagonist, Michael, believes them to be dead. The film then jumps ahead over a decade later, and Michael is in Rome. He encounters a woman there, a woman who shockingly looks just like his late wife. His wife, Elizabeth, and this woman, Sandra, are played by the same actress. He falls in love with her, or maybe he's just in love with the idea of his wife.
It's just that a single girl meets a lot of men, mostly Americans, who want to tell her about their wives.
Sandra, in the meantime, obsesses over the details of Elizabeth's demise, and we witness the untangling of a dark and twisted conspiracy. It's interesting that Obsession released in the same year as Carrie, which was a monumental film for De Palma. I say that because this movie does kind of feel like a B-side of his. It's got his trademarks: Hitchcockian narrative, obsessive men, split diopter shots, etc. It just doesn't feel as tense or as compelling as some of his better films. The best part about this movie was John Lithgow chewing the scenery. He plays as Michael's business partner, Robert LaSalle, and he has this over-the-top Southern accent that is actually pretty great.
You about ready to go back to the old US of A court?
You can feel Hitchcock's influence all over the film, especially his film Vertigo. Michael seeks out a woman who looks just like his dead wife and then basically tries to replace his wife with this copy. However, the aesthetics of this film are more in line with the grounded independent movies of the 70s. It doesn't have that clean VistaVision look that Vertigo had, and that's not really a problem at all. The problem for me was that it was so clear who the villain was from the beginning, and many of the twists were fairly predictable. The pacing was also a bit wonky, and it almost feels like each act is a separate film. You might enjoy that, but I wasn't the biggest fan of the structure of this movie. Overall, I wouldn't say that it's a bad movie per se, but it's not a great movie either. I would recommend this film to De Palma and Schrader completionists. It's not too long, and there are certainly worse movies out there. If you're gonna watch it for John Lithgow. He is pretty great here.
If you're gonna act crazy, doesn't mean I have to.
Anything.
I'll take that land
All
just
right.
to protect it from you. Somebody's gotta look after our company.
All right, damn it, I'll wait in the car.
Next up, we have Michael Mann's Manhunter. There were a few Man movies that I hadn't yet seen before, regrettably, and I gotta say, I'm shocked that I haven't seen this one before. It's so good. This film is based on the novel Red Dragon by Thomas Harris, and it's about a former FBI investigator, Will Graham, who gets dragged back into the saddle to hunt down a serial killer who only kills on full moons. His killings are gruesome, and he has the media in a frenzy, with the papers dubbing him the Tooth Fairy Killer. Graham is a crack investigator, one of the best, but his methods lead him to insanity. To find the killer, he puts himself in their shoes. He learns everything about them so that he can think like them, see like them, feel like them.
And I see me desired by you.
And thankfully, he has someone to turn to learn how to get into the mind of the Tooth Fairy Killer.
The late, great Hannibal Lecter is a wonderful man. He oftentimes would have a friend for dinner.
Yep, this is the first film featuring the famous cannibalistic doctor, as it came out 2 years before Silence of the Lambs. It's similar to Silence of the Lambs in many ways, as it's about a Fed consulting the bad doctor to help catch a deranged murderer. In this movie, Brian Cox inhabits the role of Dr. Lecter. You know, the guy from Succession? The most shocking thing about seeing him here was just how young he was. I just kind of assumed he always looked old. Graham descends into the darkness in a desperate attempt to prevent another string of murders on the next full moon. The clock is ticking, but he's got more things to worry about. Before he knows it, the killer learns of his family's whereabouts, and the case gets as personal as it could ever get. It's no longer about saving people he doesn't know. It's also about protecting his family. The film has a palpable tension, and William Petersen's performance as Graham is amazing. He allows us to see the darkness envelop his persona as he moves closer and closer to finding the killer. The other standout here is Tom Noonan, who plays as the Tooth Fairy Killer. He's menacing, creepy, and weird. Even in scenes that should feel normal or even sweet, he exudes this dark aura. I felt uneasy every time he was present, and he becomes outright terrifying in some sequences. Also, I was happy to see Kim Greaston here. When I was watching the film, I audibly said, "That's the lady from Brazil!" There was no one else at my house, so I don't know who I was talking to. Interdimensional beings that we can't perceive, maybe? I mean, I hope they appreciated my little bit of movie trivia. Manhunter, it's just such a cool movie. It's got sleek and expressive cinematography, immaculate production design, and a rad synth soundtrack. Seriously, it's everything I want out of an 80s thriller. As far as Michael Mann's movies go, I'd put this up there with Heat. I absolutely loved this film. If you haven't seen it yet, watch it as soon as you can. Now we're on to the second Michael Mann film on this list. I also can't believe I haven't seen this film before. I mean, it stars Tom Cruise, the android created by L. Ron Hubbard and programmed to be Hollywood's biggest movie star. Jokes aside, I'm a big fan of Cruise. Collateral was a movie made during Michael Mann's foray into digital filmmaking, and it was shot on HD cameras, which might not have aged well technologically speaking, but I can't deny that the aesthetic has gracefully aged. It's noisy and a bit flat looking in parts, but those imperfections in the look add to the film's grittiness. Mann and his DPs Paul Cameron and Dion Beebe offset the limitations of the cameras with interesting compositions and expressive film noir style lighting. The plot of the film, for those of you who have yet to see it, is that a taxicab driver, Max, played by Jamie Foxx, picks up a hitman, Vincent, played by Tom Cruise. Vincent needs to make 5 stops. He's in Los Angeles for the night on work, and he needs Max to drive him around and help him carry out all of his hits. What Max doesn't know is that Vincent plans to kill Max at the end of the night and frame him for all the murders. Of course, Max is not cool with the killings, but Vincent basically takes him hostage, threatening to kill him and his family if he doesn't comply.
You got 10 minutes. At 10:01, I drive to the hospital and execute your mother on my way out of town. Don't pretend indifference.
I can't do this.
But there's a snag in Vincent's plan. His first hit is discovered by a narc, and soon enough, the hunt is on to find the killer. Mann expertly raises the tension over the course of the film. We've got our hero trapped in a car with the baddie. The cops are after them, and they're also assuming that Max is an accomplice to the murders, if not the primary suspect. And soon enough, other characters who we've come to know are also in harm's way. It all takes place in a single night, and although it's not in real time, it often kind of feels like it. Tom Cruise is great as Vincent. He's cold, calculating, and just super charismatic, of course.
I tell him he's an asshole. Go ahead.
You're an asshole.
I couldn't hate his character. I actually thought Vincent was super cool, if not a bit scary. He eventually does become scary, acting like a biotic Terminator or an evil Jason Bourne in the third act. But even then, he's still pretty cool. Jamie Foxx, the real protagonist of the film, also shines here. Mann and writer Stuart Beattie give him a very satisfying arc, allowing him to shed his meek self and become a man who is more willing to take control of his life. We get the sense that he's been in a rut for many years, with only hopes and dreams of a better life, but that he hasn't had the gumption to act on his dreams. His experience as a hostage changes him, and we get to see him transform from a victim to a hero. It's heartwarming in its own way. I called my dad after watching this to ask if he had seen it. He said he really liked it, so I'm saying now that Collateral is certified dad Kino. Alright, let's head over to Amish country with the next film, Witness. Peter Weir is one of those directors who I absolutely love, but I hardly ever see get mentioned in talks about great directors. I think he's one of those directors who made a number of films that people love and admire, but they just don't know that he made them. To list off some of his classics, he directed Picnic at Hanging Rock, The Year of Living Dangerously, Gallipoli, The Last Wave, Dead Poets Society, The Truman Show, and Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World. That is a seriously stacked career. Witness, which released in 1985, was Peter Weir's first American movie. He had been directing films in Australia for some time, but Witness marks his transition to making more mainstream Hollywood films. That's not to say that he became a bad director as a result of this. No, he did not suffer the same fate as Jim Sheridan. He brought his Australian New Wave style to the American film noir. Witness boasts a pretty hard-boiled kind of story. A young Amish boy witnesses the murder of an undercover narcotics officer, and the detective assigned to that case, John Book, played by Harrison Ford, realizes that the murder is part of a larger conspiracy. A conspiracy that involves dirty cops on his force, who now know that he knows of their guilt, and so they want to kill him. John Book, trying to stay alive, lays low with the boy and his mother in a rural Pennsylvania Amish town. While he recovers and bides his time, he learns about the way of the Amish, and his modern, cynical, and secular culture clashes with the simple, religious, and peaceful culture of the Amish people. A good chunk of the film is about their cultural exchange, and it illustrates how two very different societies can exist right next to each other, or, in some cases, they can even overlap. It's not a time travel movie, but in many ways, it kind of feels like one. He ends up falling in love with the community, and paralleling that, he falls in love with Rachel, the Amish woman who nursed him back to health. He does his best to fit into the community and protect it from outside harm, but the question remains, will he be able to truly assimilate, or are there two worlds, there two paradigms, just too different? Witness is one of those movies that has it all. It's got gritty action, super tense sequences that will have you on the edge of your seat, romance, conspiracies, comedy, and those special kind of moments where you just want to say, hell yeah. Weir hits all of the right beats for the genre, ensuring that it's a solidly entertaining and fairly escapist film, but he uses that genre to explore themes of religion, cultural identity, morality, and modernity. I can't recommend this film enough. Now onto Ambulance. You know, I never thought I would cover a Michael Bay movie on this channel. That's a lie. I've wanted to make a video on Pain and Gain for some time now, but I never thought that the first Bay movie I'd cover here would be Ambulance. I had heard good things about this one ever since it released. It had a smaller budget than the other Bay movies, with the budget being only $40 million. Now, $40 million is a lot of money, but compared to other Hollywood blockbusters, that makes Ambulance practically a Sundance film. But Ambulance feels like a bigger movie than it is. When you consider that The Help, Silver Linings Playbook, and The Blind Side had similar budgets, it really brings to light the fact that Bay knows how to make a dollar go a long way when that money is being spent on explosions and car crashes. Just think. The other major Hollywood movie that featured the heroes driving an ambulance was Madam Web, and the budget for that movie was $80 million. I guess Pepsi has deep pockets.
Here you go.
Oh, thanks. You don't think that maybe in light of recent events I could use a beer?
Ambulance is a heist film, and the movie as a whole feels like a story mission from Grand Theft Auto 5. The main character, Will Sharp, is a war hero. This is a Michael Bay movie, who desperately needs a lot of money so that his wife can get life-saving surgery. The government won't help him, so he's at the end of his rope. He turns to his brother Danny for assistance, who then brings him into the heist of a lifetime. Danny's plan is to steal $32 million from a bank. He's got a whole crew together, and he has it all worked out. What could go wrong? This is an action movie, so everything could go wrong. They lose most of their crew and their getaway vehicle during the heist. So, in desperation, they steal an ambulance, and a feature film-length car chase ensues. Bay keeps the film interesting by having other people in the ambulance. There's a paramedic that they're keeping hostage and a dying cop who they need to save, for their own sakes. Much of the dramatic tension arises from the differences between the brothers. Jake Gyllenhaal's character of Danny is cavalier and kind of crazy. He's an end justifies the means kind of guy, though he's not as merciless as he says his criminal father was.
He would have killed your cops and the EMT back at the bank, and then he would have had a snack afterwards.
Will, on the other hand, isn't a bad guy. He made a bad decision by teaming up with his brother, but he serves as the moral compass for Danny. Danny is on a path of destruction, and Will is trying to mitigate the damage. The dialogue, like a lot of Bay movies, isn't the greatest. Often, I feel like the actors were ad-libbing random lines to fill up space.
Let me make you coffee. I have one of those Keurig things. They're new. You want it? It's good. Yeah? You want one?
Yeah, sure.
Boss finally splurged on us.
Some of the conversations and the jokes are quite juvenile, but Bay makes movies for teenage boys, which is not a crime. What I will say in praise of Ambulance is that I quite like the aesthetics. I found the hyperactive use of drone footage pretty incredible, and I was definitely a fan of the warm tones and the textures of the film. I also love how there are random golden hour shots of American flags waving in the wind. It's like Michael Bay reminding us that America is awesome during the movie, just in case we forgot.
Mess with Michael Bay and you mess with America. I want you guys out of my country by tomorrow morning. Brains. Every country in the world belongs to America.
The story is fairly predictable, and some of the beats at the end are cheesy and saccharine. But the truth is that there's so much more vitality in Michael Bay action sequences than any other big films that Disney or the MCU have recently released. It used to be cool to hate on Bay, but after this last decade of desaturated, weightless, and lifeless superhero action scenes, Ambulance is a breath of fresh air. It's not the greatest film, but it's entertaining and something I definitely might watch again. Now we're on to something quite different. Fat Girl by Catherine Breillat. I picked this film up as a blind buy during the Criterion sale. My girlfriend had gushed about this film to me, saying that this was a movie that was sure to get under my skin. So I figured I would give it a go. She was right. It's pretty short, and the story is fairly simple, but this movie stuck with me for a very long time. For a whole week, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The more I thought about it, the more disturbing and tragic the film seemed to me. There are two sisters, Anais and Elena. Elena is 15 and pretty. Anais is 12 and very overweight, hence the English title of the film, Fat Girl.
Peut-être, mais t'as vu tout ce qu'elle ingurgite? Moi, c'est simple, ça me coupe l'appétit. Allons.
They both are virgins, and they both want to lose their virginity. Elena wants to lose hers to a man that loves her. Anais wants to lose her virginity to a man who doesn't love her, reasoning that whoever will be her first won't be her last, and she doesn't want to disillusion herself into heartbreak. They and their well-to-do family are on holiday in a beach town in France, and while on holiday, Elena and Anais meet an Italian tourist, Fernando. He's a law student, and by the sound of it, his father's a pretty important lawyer in Italy. Fernando sets his sights on Elena, and Elena, naively, falls in love with him. He wants to have sex with her, as he's interested in taking her virginity, but she will only give herself to him if he commits to her. She wants it so that if she is to sleep with him, then he should marry her when it's possible. He then plays the role of romantic in order to get her into bed. Oh, and he also sexually abuses her. Meanwhile, Anais becomes bitter to her sister, jealous that she's about to lose her virginity, and skeptical of the fact that Fernando actually loves her. The relationship between Fernando and Elena plays out, and spoiler alert, it doesn't exactly come to a good end, but it was nothing compared to the very shocking ending of this film. Fat Girl is one of those movies that feels simple but contains so much depth in its characters and themes. It shows you how someone as predatory as Fernando can manipulate underage girls. He even knows that what he's doing is illegal.
Je vais en prison, moi. C'est trop dangereux. T'as pas 16 ans.
He's a total monster, one that appears normal, well-adjusted, and well-spoken, but a predator nonetheless. Adults can see through his act. The problem is that kids, Elena in particular, can't. It's not an easy film to watch, especially for people with kids, but it is good. I saw some reviews on IMDb saying that teenage girls should watch this movie as it can serve as a warning about the men out there who will try to abuse them. It is a difficult subject for a film to tackle, but I think Breillat did a great job here. I would definitely recommend this film if you have the stomach for it. It's not necessarily disturbing like, say, Martyrs or Sallow, but it's incredibly disturbing because it feels like it's something that could happen to your sister, your niece, your friend, or your daughter. Maybe, ending excluded, it happened to you. The next film on the list is My Own Private Idaho. The film has maintained the status of indie darling and an essential of queer cinema for decades, so I wanted to check it out and see if it lived up to the hype. I also just love River Phoenix as an actor, and I'm a fan of Gus Van Sant, with Elephant being my favorite film of his. What I wasn't expecting with this film was for it to be a quasi-adaptation of the Shakespeare play Henry IV. When the characters started talking like Shakespearean characters, I got pretty confused.
You will find out it's not true. And I hope that somebody forgives the people that have swayed your fond thoughts away from me.
And then, when the leader of their street gang in Portland appeared, a character by the name of Bob Pigeon, I thought to myself, this guy really reminds me of Falstaff. I had to pause the movie and look it up. Turns out, he was based on Falstaff. I read a bit more about the movie and learned that it's the result of Van Sant combining 3 different projects of his. An adaptation of Henry IV, a story about a hustler picked up by a German auto parts salesman, and a story about 2 cousins in Vegas who traveled to Spain to learn about their family. Once I read this, I could see all 3 different stories at play in this movie. The fact that it would go from realism to fantasy to Shakespearean theatrics gave me a bit of tonal whiplash at first, but I came to enjoy that about the film.
It will all be just one endless party.
The movie takes place in its own special world, one that's grounded very much in our reality, and one that feels fantastical and timeless. The other element that makes the movie feel timeless is River Phoenix. His costume and the way he carries himself gives off major James Dean vibes. It also feels as if Van Sant is taking his Rebel Without a Cause character and updating him for the 90s, but the result is that his character Mike feels out of time. His best friend Scotty also feels like a man out of time. He fits in the best of the Shakespearean narrative as he's based off the character of Prince Hal. He's set to inherit a massive amount of wealth from his father, but he's spending his youth trying to find himself. He lives as a rebellious libertine, selling his body for fun rather than for the need for money. He knows that this part of his life is temporary, and that he will eventually return home to lead a respectable life. And that creates a class tension between Scotty and the rest of the hustlers, especially Mike.
When I turn 21, I don't want any more of this life. My mother and father will be surprised at the incredible change.
The movie begins and ends on a long road somewhere in Idaho. It's Mike's road. He feels like the road never ends. It just goes all the way around the earth. No matter where he goes, he'll end up in that same spot he's at in the beginning.
Look, I just know that I've been here before. I just know that I've been stuck here.
He travels to Portland to hustle and he reunites with Scotty. He and Scotty then leave Portland to visit Mike's brother, who tells Mike that his mother moved away, which prompts Mike and Scotty to go on a road trip to find her. That trip takes them across Idaho and eventually to Rome, where Scotty falls in love with a local woman, which Mike doesn't take too well, as he's in love with Scotty.
And 2 guys can't love each other.
Yeah.
The film is full of melancholy and sadness. Their clients don't seem like happy people. We never know much about their lives, but there are enough clues to tell us that they're all dealing with a litany of hardships, which is why they're patrons of hustlers like Mike and Scotty. The other sex workers recount horror stories from their past in candid manners. Many of these guys are living with intense trauma. They have dreams of better lives though, and they persist through their tough times in hopes of making their situations better. Van Sant is able to make everyone in this strange film feel human and sympathetic.
Stealing is my vocation, Scott. It's not a sin for a man to labor at his vocation.
At its core, My Own Private Idaho is a film about family. Scotty and Mike find a family in Bob Pigeon's crew. They squat in buildings, sleep in the streets or rooftops sometimes, and live recklessly. There's a freedom to their way of life, but a strong sorrow definitely connects them all. But Scotty and Mike aren't content with Bob's ragtag family. They need to return to their blood. Scotty needs to give up his rebellious lifestyle to conform to his family's more conservative values if he wants to get his inheritance and bring stability into his life. Mike, on the other hand, just wants to see his mom again. He wishes for a family life that he never had. A regular and nice life that wasn't defined by dysfunction and violence. Will he ever see his mom? If he does, would it actually change anything? My Own Private Idaho is a poetic film. I love the contrast between the vistas of rural Idaho and the grungy streets of Portland. I found the way the sex scenes were shot to be cool and super creative. I can't show them here, obviously, but they're done almost like stills. The characters stay in random positions and we witness a montage of these living photographs. There's also a really neat scene where all the characters are talking while being on the covers of gay magazines. And one last thing, I think this is the only movie I've seen in which the main character is a narcoleptic.
He's not dead. He's just passed out. It's a condition.
When I was feeling really bad with the illness, I wanted to watch a feel-bad movie. I didn't want to see people being happy when I felt like crap. And I knew that there was one director to turn to for something just like this. Ingmar Bergman. With Bergman, it feels like I've seen a lot of his films, but there's always a trove of movies from him that I've yet to discover. The guy was just so prolific. He wasn't just prolific, though. He was damn good. I mean, I don't think that I've seen a single Bergman movie that I didn't like. Shame takes place during a fictional war in Sweden. Max von Sydow and Liv Ullmann, Bergman's regulars, play as a married couple, Eva and Jan Rosenberg, who used to be professional musicians, but now they run a farm a ways outside of town. The whole first part of the movie shows the effects of war from a distance. They obviously were made to at least temporarily retire from music and contribute to the war effort through farming. Money, goods, and food are in shorter supply, and military vehicles and soldiers clog up the streets when they visit the town center. That being said, they appear to live a peaceful life. They don't own a radio, so they can't hear news about the war, but there's this dread hanging over them during the first act. Their lives might be quiet now, but it feels like the quiet before a storm. And a storm does come. The enemy army invades their part of Sweden. They massacre the other farmers and surround the Rosenbergs. But instead of killing the musician couple, a documentary crew emerges from the group of fighters to ask them how they feel about being liberated. Eva talks to the camera, expressing her neutral stance, and Jan, well, he does a power move and collapses to avoid having to talk to anyone. It's horrible what happens. But this is a Bergman movie, so you know it's only going to get worse. The army doctored the film and made it seem like Eva was in total support of the invaders. They basically did a 1960s version of a deepfake of her. This lands the couple in hot water with their government. What we witness throughout the rest of the film is this couple doing whatever they can to survive. It's a film about how war brings out the worst in people. We see good people turn into monsters. People lose their humanity and treat their fellow man like beasts. Everyone's worst compulsions, their selfishness, their wrath, their lust, all come to the forefront of their personas. Like most war movies, it's an anti-war film. But unlike many other war films, it's about an entirely fictional war. We don't know who's fighting who. What side do the Rosenbergs belong to? Who are the invaders? Are the invaders actually liberating them from some autocratic regime, or is that just propaganda? Who's in the right? Who's in the wrong? In this film, it doesn't matter. The war is just chaos and confusion filled with men and women degraded to their basest instincts, like most wars. Next up, we've got a Sundance hit from the early 90s. I remember hearing about this film as it won the Grand Jury Prize for Dramatic Feature and Best Actor for Seymour Cassel at Sundance, beating out Reservoir Dogs. Funnily enough, both of these films starred Steve Buscemi, so I'd say he hedged his bets pretty well. I've seen it hailed as a Sundance winner when that festival still focused on real independent films. an artifact of a pre-corporate Sundance. I held off on watching this film even though I typically love American indie films from the 90s, simply because now, unfortunately, I just mostly watch films that relate to videos I make. It's very much a 90s American indie movie. It takes place in New York, it's shot in black and white, it's about a young filmmaker, and it even has a Jim Jarmusch cameo. At a glance, it might look like that kind of annoying type of Sundance film, but it's actually really solid. It's not a film about a down-on-his-luck artist who just needs that right kind of recognition. It's a movie about a filmmaker who thinks he's that kind of person, but in reality, he's just a bad artist. Steve Buscemi's character, Adolfo Rollo, lives in a low-rent apartment owned by mobsters, and he dreams of one day becoming a great and influential film director. What's his pathway to success? A 500-page, unfilmable script that has scenes of Nietzsche and Dostoevsky playing ping pong. All the greats, especially Godard, serve as inspiration for this film.
Adolfo?
Huh?
Shoot me. Because if you read one more line, I'm gonna shoot you.
In short, it's a complete parody of highly ambitious, pretentious, student films. He buys an ad in the classified section of the paper, asking someone to buy the script and fund the film. Surprisingly enough, someone does. That someone is an aging gangster, Joe, played by Seymour Cassel. Joe asks Adolfo what he thinks the film will cost. It's obvious that Adolfo hasn't given a single thought to the budget, so he throws out the number $250,000. Joe claims that shouldn't be a problem. But Joe and Adolfo couldn't be more dissimilar. Adolfo is introverted, shy, and kind of a pushover. Joe, on the other hand, is wild, extroverted, eccentric, and tough. Joe inserts himself into Adolfo's life, giving him limo rides, steak dinners, and taking him out to party. They do everything together, except make a movie. Part of that doing everything bit is that Joe brings Adolfo into his life of crime. He ropes him into his schemes, which Joe says are necessary for funding the film. The question arises, does Joe plan on actually producing the movie, or does he think that Adolfo is a sucker who he can goad into being his partner in crime? Part of the plot also focuses on Adolfo yearning for the woman who lives next door to him. He thinks that she's an angel and he wants her to play as an angel in his picture. What he really wants is to spend time with her, but he's too afraid to say that. Joe's not though, so Joe brings her into the film, and together they form a criminalistic producing trio. In the Soup is a pretty light and easy to watch buddy comedy movie with great comedic performances by Buscemi and Cassel. Come to think of it, I don't think I've ever disliked those actors in anything I've seen. It also sports a performance by Sam Rockwell. Now, although the director of the movie is named Alexander Rockwell, the two aren't related as far as I know. It's just a coincidence. It's a funny film, but there's also a certain dreamlike quality to it, and part of its charm lies in its cast of eccentric side characters, from the singing mafia landlords to the drug dealers in gorilla suits. They flesh out the world, and oddly enough, make the film really feel like it's based on personal experiences. It's a charming movie.
Or Renoir, early Godard.
Yeah, why not?
With Criterion releasing the restorations of 3 of Greg Araki's films this year, Totally Fucked Up, The Doom Generation, and Nowhere, Greg Araki has made a bit of a comeback in film discourse. I saw the new restoration of The Doom Generation last year, and although I did enjoy it to a certain extent, it left me wanting. It was goofy and juvenile, and I maintain that it felt like it was made by an edgy 15-year-old. But when I was sick, I was in the mood for an edgy and sophomoric teen film, so when I saw that the restoration of Nowhere was available to watch on the Criterion channel, I put it on. I was expecting to like it about as much as the Doom Generation, but I actually found myself enjoying this one way more. Nowhere is a hyper-stylized film about one day in the life of teenagers in Los Angeles. Think of it as an edgy, sex-filled, and weird version of Dazed and Confused or American Graffiti. The kids are aimless degenerates who do drugs and have lots of sex. The sets feel like art pieces in and of themselves. The saturated colors really pop and demand that you keep watching. The violence is bloody and shocking, and the soundtrack is pretty good, featuring songs by Slowdive, Hole, Blur, Nine Inch Nails, Radiohead, and plenty of other cool 90s bands. There are a number of stories in this movie that mostly all interconnect. A young boy and his girlfriend try to go to the older kid's party. Teenagers have relationship problems, a woman falls for a teen idol, and their relationship takes a very dark turn. Some people worry about the end of the world, and I mean, it's a hodgepodge of stories that paints a picture of a cynical and confused generation of youth. Even though the film is comprised of a bunch of different converging storylines, there is one story that serves as a narrative through line, the story of Dark. You might recognize Dark as the guy who played as Frank the Bunny in Donnie Darko, James Duvall. In the 90s, he was kind of like the indie film version of Keanu Reeves. Dark is studying to become a filmmaker and working on a video project, but at the same time, he's mulling over his relationship with Mel, who has a girlfriend named Lucifer. Yeah, there are a bunch of weird character names in this movie. It's part of its style. Mel also just really likes to sleep with anyone and everyone, but Dark, he wants something more committed. I'd say their open relationship isn't really working out for Dark. Like Mel, Dark is bisexual and he begins having fantasies about another boy, Montgomery. It seems like he's falling in love with Montgomery and out of love with Mel. Oh, and Dark seems to be the only teenager in his group that is witness to a string of alien abductions. The alien abduction subplot is a strange one, and it really serves as a setup to a pretty weird joke, but I liked its inclusion in the film. It adds to the elevated reality of the world, and it plays into the pessimistic Gen X outlook of the characters.
I swear I've never been so depressed, miserable and lonely in my entire life.
If you like visually gorgeous but strange movies that are filled with relationship drama and a bunch of edgy jokes, I would say go check this one out. The last film on my list was lent to me by my friend. I had never heard of the film before, but I looked into it before watching it and saw that it was part of the cinema du look movement in the 80s. You might ask, what is cinema du look? Well, the meaning is in the name. Back in the 80s and 90s, there was a movement in France among some directors to make films that focused on style and spectacle above everything else. Many of these films focused on characters who felt marginalized from society, so they weren't necessarily all style and no substance, but it was just that there always should be lots and lots and lots of style. Maybe, in many cases, the style was the substance. The moon in the gutter is over-brimming with style. Neon colors and moody lighting fill each frame of the movie. While some locations feel real, many of them are obviously movie sets. It doesn't care that you recognize the artifice. The artifice of the film is the point here. Who cares about the story when the vibes are this cool? But I guess we should at least go over the story. It opens up with something YouTube doesn't want me to say, so I'll say it in the most PG way possible. A woman gets violated and then chooses to end it all. Months later, her brother Gerard, a simple dock worker, stands at the crime scene. He vows to find her attacker. He hangs out in seedy bars and skulks the streets of Marseille all night, obsessively attempting to discover who wronged his sister. Will he ever find the perpetrator? But he's also got a life to live. He works the docks to take care of his family, and he's got a girlfriend who wants to take the relationship to the next level. However, a mysterious and rich woman enters Gerard's life, Loretta, played by Natasha Kinski. Loretta falls in love with Gerard and tries to seduce him. Much of the movie concerns the emotional tug-of-war between the two women in Gerard's heart, with each woman representing a completely different class of person. Does he stay with his jealous and more lower-class girlfriend who does genuinely care for him, or does he run off with the upper-class Loretta, who might possibly see him as a novelty? So really, the movie is about a Frenchman who's two-timing and trying to figure out which woman to actually stay with while brooding about the injustice wrought upon his family. It's very, very French. What makes it even more French is all the casual female nudity. The feeling of the movie is dreamlike. I actually thought of Twin Peaks quite a lot while watching it because it has this whole cast of strange characters. There's the eccentric rich man who loves to self-destruct, the man who's a dock worker by day and painter by night, the two haggard women at the bar who try to win the love of the men around them, and so on. The movie also moves between past, present, fantasies, and dreams in a fairly seamless fashion, which had me second-guessing whether something was actually happening, or if it had already happened, or maybe it never happened. The overt stylization of the film doesn't help, as nothing is really grounded in a reality that we would know. One scene that stands out to me is a scene from near the beginning of the movie. Gerard accepts a challenge at the bar to eat through a giant block of ice. He really munches on that thing. My teeth started to hurt just from watching it. There's also an absolutely insane transition in this film. Gerard puts his hand on a piece of malfunctioning machinery to stop a leak. The water shoots through his hand and turns into a ray of light. That line of light becomes a light under a hospital door. My jaw dropped while watching the scene transition. It's the kind of wacky stuff I want to see more of in movies. All in all, it's a very stylish French drama. I had a ton of fun watching it, and every shot in the movie is gorgeous. If this sounds up your alley, I'd highly suggest checking it out if you can find it. So there you have it, the movies that I watched while I was sick. I ended up liking or loving most of these movies, so either I got super lucky, or maybe it's just really hard to dislike a movie when you're sick and lying on the couch. Let me know if you've seen any of these movies or if you plan to watch any of them. I actually love making these videos for the channel because recommending random movies is just super fun. As always, I've been the Kino Corner, and I will see you all in the next video.